There is a number that has been sitting quietly on the ATP stats page for the last few days, and once you understand what it means, it changes the conversation. 34. That is the number of consecutive sets Jannik Sinner has won at ATP Masters 1000 level. Not games. Sets. He hasn't lost a single set in any Masters 1000 match since the second round of the Paris Masters in 2025. And as of yesterday, March 29th, he completed the Sunshine Double, winning both Indian Wells and Miami in the same season, without dropping a single set across either tournament. First player in history to do that, male or female. The possibility of winning the Sunshine Double on the men's tour began in 1985, when Miami joined Indian Wells on the ATP calendar. Not one player before Sinner, across 4 decades, had completed that double without losing a set. But we're told Alcaraz is better. Let's examine that. The debate between Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner is one the tennis world has been having for 2 years now, and it is one the tennis world will likely be having for another decade. Alcaraz is the more decorated player at this moment. 7 Grand Slam titles to Sinner's 4. He leads the head-to-head. He holds the world #1 ranking. He completed the career Grand Slam at 22. The case for Alcaraz is loud, obvious, and frequently made. This video is about the other argument, the quieter one. The one being made not just by statistics and score lines, but by the people who know this sport most intimately. The coaches, the legends, and the competitors who have watched both players up close and arrived at a clear conclusion. And that conclusion is this: when you strip out the variety, the highlights, and the crowd-pleasing theatrics, and you look at what tennis at its most complete actually demands, Jannik Sinner is the better tennis player. Former Wimbledon champion and legendary coach Goran Ivanisevic put it in terms that are difficult to argue with. "I always compare Sinner to Novak," he said. "They are more similar, only Sinner now has more power, a better engine, tires, wheels, all of that. When he catches you, he bites like a shark, devours you." The Tennis Gazette Ivanisevic spent 5 years working alongside Novak Djokovic, the greatest tennis player in history. He knows the Djokovic model from the inside, and his assessment is that Sinner is that model but upgraded. More power, better engine, and once he locks onto you in a match, the outcome is almost unavoidable. That upgrade framing is not just coming from Ivanisevic. It is the central argument of Patrick Mouratoglou, arguably the most respected and analytically rigorous coach in modern tennis. Mouratoglou was Serena Williams' coach for the majority of her dominant years. He built UTS. He has coached and studied more elite tennis than almost any other living figure in the sport. And after the 2026 Australian Open semi-final, where Djokovic produced a remarkable win over Sinner in 5 sets, Mouratoglou made his position unmistakably clear. After Novak Djokovic's victory over Jannik Sinner in the Australian Open 2026 semi-final, many of you said, "This proves the big three were better than Alcaraz and Sinner. I disagree. That's a short view," he wrote. "First, you cannot take one match and turn it into a rule. Before that semi-final, Jannik had won 5 matches in a row against Novak. That didn't suddenly disappear because of one result. Tennis-wise, I stand by what I've said for the last 2 to 3 years. Jannik is superior to Novak today in pure tennis terms. He moves faster, he hits harder, he takes the ball earlier, he serves better." That last sentence is the one that matters most to this argument. Mouratoglou isn't saying Sinner is a good player or that Sinner plays at a high level. He is saying that in the core technical metrics of tennis, pace, movement, ball striking, service quality, Sinner is ahead of Djokovic, of everyone who came before him. And the implication that flows from that is uncomfortable for the Alcaraz camp. Because if Sinner is the most technically advanced baseline player in the history of the sport, the question becomes, what exactly does Alcaraz do better? Alcaraz's advocates will point to the variety, the drop shots, the slice, the net game, the creativity. And they are right that Alcaraz has a more diverse skill set. Even Sinner has acknowledged that directly. "Alcaraz and I are 2 very different players," Sinner said. "I keep the pace very high. I'm mentally strong. He is physically strong, and tennis-wise, he has something more at the moment. He plays slice and volleys better, but for me it's positive. It means I have room to improve. Carlos is outstanding on the court. Drop shots, passing shots, lobs, great volleys. New Sinner's words are characteristically humble, but read them carefully. What he is describing is a player whose greatest strength is variety. And then look at what Sinner is describing about himself. Pace, mental strength, consistency. These are not lesser qualities. These are the qualities that win Grand Slams. John McEnroe, a 7-time Grand Slam champion and one of the sharpest analytical minds the sport has produced, identified the distinction precisely when he said, Alcaraz is the more emotional player, relying on feel and creativity, and finding it difficult to focus when his muse eludes him. Sinner is the more consistent and relentless performer, whether from point to point or week to week. That framing is everything. One player depends on inspiration. The other is built on a foundation that doesn't require inspiration. It just requires showing up, which Sinner does with a consistency that has no parallel in the current game. Look at the hard numbers from 2025. In the 12 months leading into the 2026 Australian Open, Sinner compiled a 49-2 record against players not named Carlos Alcaraz. And one of those losses was a retirement. That is not a good season. That is a near-perfect one. And at the 2025 ATP Finals in Turin, on the year-end stage where the best 8 players in the world compete, Sinner beat Alcaraz 7-6, 7-5, securing the year-end trophy for the 2nd consecutive season. That is the definitive statement of a tennis year. Who wins when the 2 best players in the world meet at the final event of the season, in a match that determines the year-end number 1? Sinner. Twice in a row. Patrick McEnroe, broadcasting for ESPN at the US Open in August 2025, made the case plainly after Sinner won Wimbledon for the first time earlier that summer. I give Sinner the slight edge at the moment, although when you look at just the head-to-head, it favors Alcaraz very significantly. But this year you have got to look at the fact Sinner has won 2 of the 3 majors. He wins Wimbledon for the first time, and overall he is more consistent. The key word is consistency. It is the word every credible analyst keeps returning to when they try to articulate what makes Sinner different. And consistency in professional tennis is not a lesser virtue than creativity. It is the supreme virtue. The player who can produce elite tennis every match, every tournament, every week, regardless of form, surface, or circumstance, that player is the harder opponent to defeat in the long run. The physical argument for Sinner being the superior player is one that tends to get overlooked because Alcaraz's physique is so obviously impressive. But Sinner's physical evolution over the last 2 years has been remarkable. Tommy Paul's coach Brad Stein, speaking on Tennis Channel, identified a specific change in Sinner's approach. I think one of the reasons Jannik won at Wimbledon is because he's doing different things based on what he feels he needs to do. The ability to identify what a match requires and adjust to provide it in real time across a best-of-5 Grand Slam final is an elite cognitive skill. It is precisely what separates good players from great ones. And Stein is observing it in Sinner's game at a level that even Alcaraz, for all his gifts, doesn't consistently demonstrate. Then there is the serve. This is perhaps the most underappreciated element of Sinner's superiority over Alcaraz. In his Miami Open final against Lehecka, Sinner won 92% of his first serve points and saved all 3 break points he faced across the entire tournament. Tennis 365, 92%. In a Masters 1000 final, in difficult weather conditions, on a surface that wasn't playing fast. Alcaraz's serve is functional. Sinner's serve, at its best, is a weapon. Muratoglu made this explicit in his post-Australian Open analysis. Sinner serves better than Djokovic. Djokovic's serve was good enough to win 24 Grand Slams. The arithmetic is not complicated. Supercoach Brad Gilbert, speaking about the state of men's tennis in 2026, articulated the broader picture with characteristic directness. Sinner and Alcaraz have pulled away from everybody for almost the last 2.5 years. That framing, pulled away from everybody, is the context in which the Sinner versus Alcaraz debate exists. This is not a question about who is good. Both are extraordinary. This is a question about which of the two extraordinary players is more likely to beat the other over the course of a long match, a long season, or a long career. And the evidence points consistently toward the player built on relentless consistency, not inspired chaos. Even the players who have tried to compete with both of them describe Sinner in terms that quietly concede his superiority. Wimbledon champion Goran Ivanisevic's former player, speaking to Clay magazine, described watching the Roland Garros final and saying, "This isn't tennis, it's like Wii tennis. They're not human." That reaction applies to both of them. But the qualifier that gets attached more often to Sinner is the word machine. Methodical, relentless, inevitable. These are the words opponents use when they lose to Sinner. Not lucky, not inspired, inevitable. And the most recent evidence, what has happened in the last 4 weeks alone, makes the argument as clearly as any quote ever could. Alcaraz arrived at Indian Wells as world number 1, with a 16-match winning streak and the Australian Open title in his pocket. He lost to Sebastian Korda in the 3rd round of Indian Wells. He lost to Daniil Medvedev in straight sets before that. Meanwhile, Sinner won Indian Wells, then won Miami, without dropping a set in either tournament. "It means a lot to me. Winning the Sunshine Double for the first time, it's incredible," Sinner said after the Miami final. "It's something I never would have thought because it's difficult to achieve. We made it somehow, so I'm very happy. Made it somehow." That phrase only sounds modest on the surface. What Sinner has actually done is become the first player in 4 decades of Sunshine Double history to complete it without losing a single set. He trails Alcaraz in the world rankings by 1,190 points heading into the clay season. Sinner has a 19-2 record in 2026. Alcaraz has a 16-4 record. The gap is closing fast. The debate between these two will define men's tennis for the next decade. Alcaraz won more slams. Alcaraz leads the head-to-head. Alcaraz is world number 1. The case for him is real and it is legitimate. But the case being made by Muratoglu, by Ivanisevic, by Patrick McEnroe, by Brad Gilbert, and by the numbers themselves is that the player sitting at number 2 in the world right now is actually playing the more complete and more reliable version of the game. He is faster, harder to break, more consistent under pressure, and, right now, as of the final week of March 2026, playing the best tennis in the world. The rankings don't reflect that yet, but if history tells us anything about Jannik Sinner, it's that the rankings eventually catch up. What do you think? Is Sinner actually the better player right now, or does the head-to-head tell the real story? Let me know in the comments below.